Welcome to TBG Talks, expert insights for your business success, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of accounting and finance, consulting, business, and the employee experience with experts at the Bonadio Group. In each episode, we'll sit down with our firm's thought leaders to discuss the latest trends, challenges, and strategies shaping the industries we serve and the modern-day accounting workforce. Today's episode of TBG Talks is hosted by myself, Valerie Busella, Content Marketing Manager here at the Bonadio Group, and I am joined by Nick Cozzolino, who is a principal within the Bonadio Group's Cybersecurity Consulting Division, FoxPointe Solutions. Nick is an experienced IT professional with a background in the accounting industry. He specializes in network security, business continuity, information security, disaster recovery, and cloud computing. Today, we are sitting down with Nick to discuss the ever-evolving world of information security and the growing importance of the Virtual Chief Information Security Officer role, or the vCISO role. Nick explains what a vCISO is, how it differs from a traditional CISO, and why more organizations are turning to this model for flexible, cost-effective cybersecurity leadership. We discuss how a vCISO supports compliance, risk management, and incident response. We share examples of real-world impacts and explore what makes a vCISO truly effective in strengthening long-term security frameworks. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi, Nick. Welcome to TBG Talks. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Valerie. Thanks for having me.
So to start out, could you share a little bit about your background and maybe what drew you into cybersecurity? I know that you recently stepped into a new role here at TBG, so if you could maybe just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. For the last 20 plus years, I've been in the IT and information security space. For the longest time, I was in an internal IT and internal information security. And in the last year, I have transitioned to the consulting side. One of the kind of drivers behind that is I'm seeing companies breached all the time. There's incident after incident after incident. And usually the reasoning is always the same, right? There's some sort of human error, there's some sort of technical error that takes place. And, I figured we've done a lot here at the Bonadio Group to safeguard our environment. And I wanted to take what we've done here, what we've learned here, and try and help our clients, and even clients that aren't part of Bonadio, to safeguard their environments. And I figured that the best way was to get out there and start working with FoxPointe Solutions. And, I've already been engaged with multiple clients and helping them secure their environments.
That's great. Can you give our listeners a brief overview of FoxPointe Solutions as a whole and what types of services that your team provides?
Yeah, for sure. So FoxPointe kind of has three main buckets that they operate out of. First is the compliance side, where we will work in the education sector, finance, healthcare, professional services, and others, where we'll come in and evaluate you against your whatever laws and regulations, or even against industry best practices. We will evaluate you against those, or your organization against those, and come up with a gap, or identify the gaps where you're out of compliance, and then come up with a plan for how you get there. We also do a lot in the space. I'll just kind of refer to it as a trusted advisor, where we will act as a member of your organization, specifically in IT leadership or as information security leadership, where we refer to it as a virtual chief information officer or a virtual chief information security officer, where we can develop strategy, we can develop programs, we can manage your environment. Even if you have existing IT staff, we can come in and lead them as well. Even if you're working with like a managed service provider, a lot of our clients do that. They outsource their IT. We can come in and help provide some structure to those things. It's usually very beneficial because the MSP just really focuses on the operational side of IT. They're not really focusing on the leadership side. So we can provide the leadership, the strategy, the tactics, whether it's IT or IS, right, to help align the MSP with the goals and objectives of the organization. And then the last piece of that is really the technology. So we use a tech stack to manage all of our work, so that when we start an engagement, we can show through our tools, like, okay, here's where you were, here's where you are today. So you can take that information, bring it to your executive leadership or your boards and say, here, let's look at all the progress that we've made working with FoxPointe over the last X number of months. We also have a security stack that we can put out there. So that's your antivirus, your security awareness training, your kind of network monitoring type stuff, like to see if something weird's going on, you get alerted. We have a whole tech stack that we can put in your environment to address all of your needs. And then we also do the your penetration testing, which is us sending in an ethical hacker to try to break into your network, right? We're not really going to break anything, but we want to get in to kind of see where the weaknesses are so that we can continue to secure your environment. And then the last one is like tech, we call it tech enablement, where if you want to implement Microsoft 365, we can come in and do that. You need a whole shipment of new computers. We can get those ordered and have those delivered with your computer image on them, so that you can just kind of plug them in and go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So you mentioned the virtual chief information security officer, the vCISO. So today I would love to kind of hone in specifically on that and have a conversation about that role. So to set the stage and kind of provide a little bit more background to this conversation, how would you explain the role of a regular chief information security officer or a CISO to somebody who's unfamiliar with cybersecurity?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, let's just start out with kind of explaining there's the disciplines within IT. 'Cause I think some of these get crossed over from time to time, where they'll look at the IT leader and say, well, that person should be doing information security. And they look at the information security person and say, well, they really are IT as well. And then there's also compliance. So if we just kind of put those in their respective buckets, we could say, well, IT, their primary focus is to keep the trains running. So like if you ever come into work and you say, well, I just turn my computer on and everything just works, I don't know what happens behind the scenes, that's IT, right? They're keeping everything up to date and moving. Your information security is going to define what controls need to be in place. That's going to be your encryption, your multi-factor authentication, et cetera. And then there's compliance, which is going to say, hey, we need to comply with these rules and regulations. So your CISO is going to take information from the compliance side. They're going to translate that into something IT understands. So again, the compliance is going to say, well, there's this law and it says we have to have all of our data encrypted. We have to have multi-factor authentication. We have to have this, that, and the other thing. And then your CISO in the information security team is going to put that into something that IT understands. So they're going to say, hey guys, our MFA needs to be configured like this, or this system needs to have MFA. And then IT is then going to execute it. And then your CISO is going to kind of regularly evaluate how those controls are performing. So if they are not functioning properly, if everybody's not assigned to those things, right? We want to make sure that when we are implementing controls that they are actually functioning. So your CISO is going to obviously implement the controls stated by compliance, but they're also going to look at things like industry best practices. So they'll take a framework, and a framework is really just a list of controls that somebody else has defined. So like NIST is the they define frameworks that we all use today, and we probably don't even realize it. So there's NIST CSF 2.0. Pretty much everybody out there that is doing what we do uses this as a means to secure their environment. So they're going to use a framework to help secure their environment. The CISO is also going to work with leadership to kind of align what information security is doing with the organization's goals and objectives. So if the organization says, hey, we're going into this market, we are doing M&A, we're doing this, that. So they are going to help define processes and procedures and policies that are going to align with whatever they are doing. So if they're going into a new market, maybe that new market has different set of controls, or has different control requirements. Well, they're going to help identify what those are, and they're going to work towards making sure they can meet all those requirements. So what they're not going to do, though, is they're not going to put their hands in IT, right? You generally don't want your CISO going in even your information security team, like they shouldn't be managing IT. They're not going to go in and configure the servers. They're not going to go in and fix desktops. They're not going to go in and deploy software. That's what your IT does. Information security is more like an advisory type where they're going to say, hey, we need to have these policies in place. Our systems need to be configured like this. Our trainings need to happen like this. And they are going to work through others to make sure all that happens.
Great. I think that that's a really helpful breakdown of the difference between those roles. Um, Moving kind of into why this is all kind of important. Should organizations that handle regulated data, thinking like financial institutions, healthcare organizations, higher ed, etc., why is it so important for them to prioritize information security specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. Since COVID, we have just continued to see increases in data breaches, in fines, in damage, and impact. And so, there was obviously a huge jump during COVID, but we haven't seen that slow down. Since COVID, we've seen all sorts of new tools come out to help keep us safe. We've seen new laws and regulations come out to kind of push us to safeguard industry data or really regulated data. And we continue to see the breaches impact large organizations. And so between 2023 and 2024, there was I think a $3 or $4 billion increase in damages, bringing it up to like 17, $18 billion in damages, the highest it's ever been. And so, what your CISO should be doing it is helping you implement an information security program that addresses the risk to your organization, aligns you with your laws and regulations, but also is willing to roll up their sleeve and help create a culture of security. Some of that can be done certainly at a macro level, right? Putting in policy and the tools, but to create a culture of security, you got to do it at the micro level. You got to get to the people that are leading everybody at every level of the organization, help them understand what their role is in information security, and just continue to say the same thing over and over again. Changing behavior, shifting culture is a very long process. But it can be done, right? Everyone's got to know what their role is in InfoSec so they can understand how they can help not only safeguard themselves but safeguard the companies that they work for.
That makes a lot of sense. I like how you framed that. It's unfortunately not getting any better. So now's the time to start thinking about these things if you haven't already. Um, so you obviously kind of ran through what a CISO is and what they can do. Can you tell us a little bit about what a virtual chief information security officer or a vCISO, what that role is and how that kind of differs from the traditional CISO role?
Yeah, one of the benefits to the vCISO role is it's a consumption model. So well, let me take a step back and just kind of explain kind of what gave birth to the whole vCISO role. And because what we're seeing is that it's very difficult to find qualified people to step into this role. Like if you look at it from this perspective, like think about maybe a healthcare institution. Well, they're looking for a qualified vCISO within the area that they work in, within the industry that they operate in. And so when you start looking at it from that perspective, like your focus of like or your at least your options for finding a qualified CISO became smaller and smaller. When you start going by industry, by location, by experience, et cetera, you get to a very small list of people. And so we've also seen that a lot of security and professionals are leaving the industry. It's a very high risk industry. It's a very stressful industry, and so we're seeing them leaving on a somewhat regular basis. So this all kind of gave birth to the vCISO, where you could share a chief information security officer across lots of different companies. So if you're looking for somebody that with healthcare experience, well, they may not be located in your area, but you have somebody that has 20 years experience, has all the credentials, right? Has worked in the industry and has all the tools available to them to build an information security program. So you get a qualified individual. It's a consumption model where you can say, well, we just need somebody to help us with defining what our policy should be. Okay, you can have somebody come in and do that. If you want the whole thing, where you want someone to come in and design an information security program, as well as your policies and procedures, and reporting to the board and all that, all the things you would expect a CISO to do, well, you can engage a vCISO to do that as well. The benefit to a lot of companies as well is cost. So if you think about, you have a reasonably sized organization looking for a seasoned CISO, you're looking in the six figures just to get somebody in the door. And then there's all the other expenses. You get healthcare and PTO and all those other things that really add up. Well, you don't have to worry about that with a vCISO. Again, it's a consumption model. You're just paying for their services. You don't have to pay for their PTO, their healthcare, and all those other expenses. So it's a really effective model for companies that are looking to get a really seasoned person but don't want to pay for a full-time employee.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Opening the pool to remote work, I feel like, is it impacts literally every industry, and the types of experience that they can get. Um, you mentioned a little bit about kind of cost savings there. Can you speak a little bit more about how the vCISO model helps organizations reduce costs compared to hiring a full-time CISO, and even time savings as well?
Yeah. One of the things that the vCISO brings is that it takes some of the load off of your internal staff. So generally, in smaller organizations, you're going to see somebody that is assigned as the IT person, is the information security person, is the compliance person, right? And usually this person is somebody that sits in in HR or in finance or somewhere in operations. They don't really, their skill set generally isn't going to be IT or IS or even compliance. So this really helps your frees up your staff to do some other things, to really focus on the things that they should be doing. From a cost perspective, it really depends on the scope of the engagement, but you're probably looking at a 50+% reduction in cost instead of having a full-time CISO. So again, that number can vary based on like what services you're having them come in to do, but generally 50% is generally what you're going to see saved by having a vCISO. You're also not paying for them to be in an office and basically everything that comes along with a full-time employee. You're not giving them a computer. You're generally not giving them software, right? So all those other costs, those things we probably don't think about very often, you don't have to worry about any of that, right? They'll bring their own computer. You'll probably have to provide them with some level of access to something like maybe a SharePoint site or something like that, so they can get to your policies and all those things. But those are minimal costs in comparison to having a full-time employee.
Yeah, those are huge cost savings, especially for organizations like health and human services and higher ed who are already operating on like tight budgets to begin with. Those are insane cost savings. So how does engaging a vCISO provide like flexibility and stability for an organization?
When we talk about flexibility, it's generally in the execution of controls. I mean, certainly, there are going to be systems that you have, or sorry, there's going to be controls that you have to put in place, or really things that we are really going to push for, like, hey, you really should have multi-factor authentication on these really really important systems. But there might be other systems that maybe don't need the same level of controls. Vendor management is a great example of how you can have kind of varying approach to how you implement controls. So your vendor that brings in, say, your paper, you're not going to scrutinize them as much as a vendor where you're going to store all of your data, right? So there's flexibility in how you execute controls based on the criticality and the data classification. And there's other things, like from a flexibility standpoint, again, like there isn't necessarily a commitment with starting with the VC. So it's really what you need. So if you just need policy, if you just need procedure, if you need the whole thing, right? You can do all of that. It can be a slow approach, a low trajectory over a long timeline. It can be a really aggressive approach, right? So um, the other part of your question, adding stability, and one of the things about information security is that it's a very iterative process, meaning that let's say again using the vendor management as a good example, you bring in vendor A, they get evaluated. They get vetted, right? You do make sure all the right contract language is in place. You make sure that they are properly executed, that all the right controls are in place, and then a year later, depending on how you categorize your vendors, you're going to evaluate them again. And you're going to do that over and over and over again. And that's what a lot of information security is. It's putting in process and procedure and policy that you are going to do these things all the time. So change management would be another great example where you say, okay, when something changes within our environment, we have to conduct a risk assessment. These other people need to get involved to weigh in on the change, right? And so you define what a change is. And anytime that change happens, the right people are brought in to talk about it and identify any sort of risks and then mitigate those risks. And so it is creating stability by creating a consistent approach to how you do everything, right? Whether you're managing risk, whether you're managing change, whether you're implementing new systems, it doesn't matter. We bring a consistent approach to how you do these things so that nothing is, I want to say nothing is missed, but less things will fall through the cracks because you're doing a lot more due diligence on a regular basis.
I love that you mentioned that you can kind of pick and choose what you want the vCISO to do. Like it doesn't have to be like an all or nothing approach. I think that is super helpful in terms of like the flexibility for businesses to not have to feel like they're taking on this huge thing. It's like if they only need a couple services, like the vCISO can handle that. I think that's really helpful. Um, could you go in a little bit more depth on some of the strategic and operational responsibilities that a vCISO can handle?
Yeah, yeah, we don't want to come in and just start implementing change. The beginning, the first probably I would say 30 to 90 days of an engagement is really going to be discovery, right? Understanding kind of what are your compliance requirements? How are you operating today? Where are all of your really important systems? Who are all the stakeholders, right? We want to get a good lay of the land and then start working towards developing an information security strategy, developing a written information security plan, and then just starting to slowly implement those things based on where the risks are. You want to look at like where are you at today and where are you not in compliance with whether it's best practice or it's laws and regulations, right? And then evaluate the risks to determine, okay, where do we start, right? Maybe all your access controls, which is your usernames and passwords and your multi-factor authentication, maybe you're really weak there. That's a high risk area, right? So we would start there. We would work through that. We would define, as I mentioned earlier, we would define like an information security strategy, and that would just be kind of the approach of what we are going to do going forwards, right? So maybe we're going to say all of our stuff is going to be stored in a secure cloud environment, and that would be the strategy going forward. Is that we would work with leadership to define, and then our written information security plan is going to state, well, within that, our secure environments, we are going to have multi-factor authentication. We're going to review like what access accounts have within the system. Like, should that person be an administrator? Should they have those level of permissions? We would also say like we would do a regular vendor review. All our data needs to be encrypted, right? This is all stuff that we would define as we go, and then we would ensure that that stuff's in place at the onset of, say again, this cloud environment. So we would a lot of what we do is certainly setting strategy, and then a lot of what we do is also on that operational side where we're working with you on vulnerability management, right? We're defining where your vulnerabilities are, helping you prioritize which ones need to be remediated. We're helping you with your pen tests, and again, remediating those vulnerabilities. We're helping you with your tabletop exercises where we're testing your incident response plans, right? And we're also in there developing your incident response plan, your disaster recovery plans, your business continuity plans, right? All of those things we are going to help you put in place. It takes a lot of time, but ultimately we want to put all the right things in place to help keep your environment safe.
You mentioned kind of a little bit about regulatory compliance and how a vCISO can help support with that. Obviously, you know better than anyone that certain organizations have a ton of regulations that they need to be compliant with. So, can you speak a little bit more on how a vCISO can really support keeping businesses up to date with all of their, or keeping them compliant with all of the regulations?
Yeah, this is where our tools come into place. We leverage a lot of tools, and that we can come in and we can evaluate you against your laws and regulations, your industry best practices, et cetera, right? So financial institutions, higher ed, professional services firm, the healthcare industry, like these are all great examples of industries that have a lot of regulatory requirements. So we can plug all that in, all your regulatory requirements into our tooling, and then we would perform a gap assessment, and we'll see kind of where you're at today against where you should be. And it'll give us, we can generate a great list of, okay, these are all the things you're not in compliance with. Here's a prioritized list, and then we can work together on remediating those things. So the beauty of these tools is that as the laws and regulations change, the tools are updated. So on a regular basis, we are going into our tools and kind of rerunning the reports to see kind of, okay, what has changed, right? And then that whole process of, okay, we're gonna find out where the gaps are. We're gonna reprioritize all of our efforts again based on wherever these changes are, and then we're gonna bring that to the stakeholders and say, okay, this is what we need to work on right now. This needs to be in place by these dates, and we're going to continue to execute that. And again, it's like I said earlier, it's a very iterative process. We're going to go back through and we're going to check on a regular basis to see what's changed. And of course, we do a lot of due diligence and a lot of research on what laws and regulations are changing out there. So we have vCISOs that specialize in the financial sector, in healthcare, et cetera, right? And so they're very in tune with kind of what's changing out there. And so they really complement each other. You have our tools that give us kind of the high level, like, okay, here's what's changing, here's what's going to be affected. And then we have our vCISOs that are really in the weeds and kind of understand, okay, this is really how it affects an organization. Here's how we should prioritize it, right? And then we work with the stakeholders to figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a wealth of knowledge that the vCISO brings. It's just so many regulations to have to think of, especially as a business that does have limited resources. I think a vCISO makes a lot of sense. Um, can you speak a little bit about how working with a vCISO kind of frees up internal resources and can overall improve efficiency within a company? I know that's a huge benefit of just outsourcing in general. So can you speak up about that a little bit more on the vCISO side?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of companies today have people that are wearing lots of hats, right? I think we all do. It doesn't matter kind of what position you're in, you're always wearing multiple hats. But sometimes we have people wearing too many hats, right? And they'll struggle to get certain aspects of their job done. And that's where the vCISO can come in and really help with, okay, I'm going to take all of your information security work off your plate. I'm going to possibly even the compliance off your plate, maybe even be able to take IT off your plate, right? We have resources that go beyond just doing VC. So we have resources that can do specifically compliance. We have resources that can do specifically IT. So we can kind of pull all that off of their plate. And so that frees them up to do other things, probably get back to doing what they were originally intended to do. So that's a huge benefit to a lot of organizations. And the other part of this is that we can help prioritize their work, right? We have a lot of experience in implementing these information security programs. Doesn't matter if there's compliance or not required, right? We can say, okay, this is the really important stuff. Here's where you're weak, and then we can help them focus their efforts. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to be had to help having your employees do what they were originally hired to do, and then you can have kind of subject matter experts, which is your vCISOs, to kind of help prioritize their efforts and kind of prioritize the efforts of your your executive leadership, right? Because a lot of the stuff kind of works its way up to your board of directors, your executive leaders on making decisions on maybe it's future investments, maybe it's changes within the organization, right? Those are the sort of things we want to help them prioritize and bring visibility to it and get that in front of the decision makers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any examples of a time where maybe a vCISO helped an organization overcome a specific cybersecurity challenge or issue?
Yeah, we have there's been multiple instances where a company may have a very complex um, compliance requirements. So like something like a Sarbanes-Oxley. New York State recently just released their new rules for securing healthcare organizations. These are these are a mile wide and a mile deep, and they're very, very difficult to kind of understand what to put in place if you don't have the expertise. So we have clients that kind of fall into both of those buckets. So we want to take those again. Our approach is very consistent. So we're going to take those new regs. Let's say the new DOH rules in New York State. We're going to take those and we're going to perform a gap assessment. We're going to look at, okay, here's where you're at today, here's where you need to be, and then we are with these clients, we are working to develop a timeline. Or sorry, we're working to identify their gaps, and then we're prioritizing what needs to be done, and then we're developing a timeline, and then we are just working through these things kind of systematically. And the same thing with clients that have to deal with things that are publicly traded, right? Becoming publicly traded, there's a lot that goes into doing that, and we're working with them to define their reporting requirements, getting all their systems in place and all their policies and procedures, right? So we have Kate, our scenario after scenario where we are coming into difficult situations, and then we are helping clients work through that over a period of time.
Great. Those are awesome examples. Thanks for sharing. Let's say you're a business and you're not quite sure if a vCISO is the right solution for you. What should these organizations consider when deciding if they should or shouldn't pursue a vCISO?
Well, I think it kind of starts with kind of understanding what are the risks that are out there. I mean, I think if you're working in an environment where you're a financial institution, you're a healthcare organization, any of these ones that deal with regulated data, you can at least reach out to FoxPointe and inquire about, okay, what should I have in place? And I think a lot of this is they probably don't. It's like with anything, right? There's lots of things out there that I don't know that that I don't know. All right, and so that's why we would always lean on an expert to kind of help us kind of fill in those gaps. And I think that that's the first step, right? Is to kind of understand like what effect is there going to be if whatever data I have is exposed, and that starts with a conversation with somebody like a vCISO, right? They can tell you kind of what are you supposed to comply with, what controls do you need to have in place. You may even be able to get down to the level telling, okay, this is the investments you're going to have to make to become compliant, right? And that's kind of where we can help clients kind of understand that, and get them on the right path.
Yeah, definitely. What would you say would be some of the most common challenges that an organization might face when integrating a vCISO into their operations?
I would say the biggest one is time, resources and time. While we can take a lot off of their plate, once we start kind of like peeling back that onion and saying, okay, well, you have to comply with this and you have to comply with that, and these are the controls you're going to have to put in place. There's work that needs to be done, right? We can do a lot of it, but there are parts of it, again, depending on how the engagement is set up. We have clients that they wanna be the face of any change to the organization. So when we say, okay, it's time to do this, they take the lead on it and they run with it. We have other clients where we can act as the face of information security and compliance, right? So then we are interacting directly with them. But when you're implementing policy, you're pulling in your executive leadership to have them review and basically evaluate the new policies and how that's going to affect the organization. Developing procedure is probably one of the most time-consuming parts of implementing an information security program. The policies are generally easy. The language is pretty straightforward. Usually everybody everybody agrees on them in a relatively short period of time. But then when it comes time to actually execute those, you now have to document how are we going to do this, especially in environments where they are heavily regulated. Your controls have to be designed to be auditable, which is a whole nother level of designing a control. Meaning, if I say I'm going to do something, I have to be able to produce evidence that we actually did it, right? So it's all of that minutia, right? All that stuff where we normally will get tripped up in something is all those details, right? And that's probably the part where we see some of the biggest challenges is once we get past the policies, that's usually pretty quick. Once we start getting into the procedure, that's where things will slow down a little bit because now we are just saying, okay, we're going to work on this one little thing. And we have to define how we do it. We got to be able to write it down. We got to be able to produce it. And that's where things slow down because it's like, okay, we got to do it. And we got to test it. And then we got to communicate it to everybody. And then that goes into the cyber program where now that's an iterative process. And we just keep doing that with every control. And so it just takes a while to kind of get those things in place, get everybody on board, get everybody trained. That's where things can certainly, that's where the challenges are, is in that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the vCISO is like a very like helpful model for a long-term time savings and money savings. But again, there's still work that needs to be done up front to get everything moving. In your experience, what distinguishes a highly effective vCISO from maybe a less effective one?
Yeah, I think the most important part is when you come in is that you're not coming in just making change, right? One of the most important things is you got to understand what the environment is. You got to understand who you're working with. You have to understand what's in place. So get a good lay of the land, understand what's out there, right? What do they have in place today? I also think there's a huge distinguisher between the vCISOs that are using tools like what we have and the ones that may be working out of spreadsheets and things of that nature. I think there's a lot of efficiency to be gained by using the tools because of the tools. Like we use one product that allows us to evaluate. It basically allows us to conduct a gap assessment. We can see kind of where you're at against industry standard and your compliance and design a program of where you're going to go. So we can, using our tools, we start checking the boxes up. Okay, we put this thing in place, we put that in place. We can see it produces measurable results of what the company's investment is in the vCISO service, and that's great information to feed to your board and to your executive leadership and say, hey, look, we're actually making progress. We're reducing risk. We're putting controls in place. And so I think that's certainly an important part of the vCISO. And the one thing that's often overlooked is a vCISO's ability to communicate and to think like a business leader. Communication is really important in the sense where your vCISO can't talk in CISO language, right? In information security and IT lingo, they need to be able to break it down into something that everybody can understand. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of that. Where like you talk to that highly technical person in your help desk department, you're like, what in the world is that person saying, right? And so I think we have to be able to speak in a language that everybody can understand. But again, the other part though is think like a business leader. Um, you, we can't implement controls that outweigh the cost of the risk, right? So if the risk should cost more than the control, again, like this isn't set in stone, but generally, you don't want to put in $1 million control to protect maybe $1,000 worth of data, right? So, but those are things that your risk department, your legal, and your executive leadership are going to evaluate. But those are the things that your CISO should be thinking ahead of time before they're bringing it to your executive leaders, right? You don't want to be making investments that don't make sense, right? And that's what your CISO should be thinking about before they're sitting down with leaders making recommendations for new software or controls or change that need to be put in place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a couple things to keep in mind when you are like deciding which vCISO you do want to go with is are they using kind of like up-to-date softwares? Can they communicate well with you? I think those are just like great things to keep in mind. I mean, I feel like if you're in cybersecurity, you should definitely be using the most
Yes,
up-to-date
for sure.
software. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind when you're looking for a vCISO. So to wrap up, what would you say is the most important key takeaway from today's conversation? If we could give our listeners just like maybe one thing to summarize the conversation and that they can take away, what would that be?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the one of the key things is to ask for help. If you are wearing those multiple hats today, if you are buried in trying to understand what to do in IT, what to do in information security, what you should be doing about compliance, reach out to a vCISO. They can absolutely help point you in the right direction. Like here at FoxPointe, we can pull in the proper resources. Our vCISOs can help you with your information security needs, as well as a little bit of compliance and a little bit of IT. But we also have resources that just specialize in IT and compliance, right? So everybody working together can take a lot of that decision making off your plate, can help put a strategy in place, put a program in place so that you're making the right investments, and that all three kind of disciplines that IT, infosec, and compliance are all heading in the right direction.
Awesome. I think that's a really solid takeaway. And then just for fun, just to wrap up the conversation, we like to ask all of our guests if they have any podcast or book recommendations. It definitely does not need to be related to cybersecurity, although it certainly can be, but just really anything that you're enjoying right now that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that I would like to recommend. One is book called Amp It Up, and it was written by the CEO of a company called Snowflake. Snowflake is an IT company that does a lot in kind of like manipulation of data, and it's a really unique model. But that company has really exploded since the current CEO took over, and he really kind of explains his approach to how he took a company that was struggling to now they are just prospering beyond belief. And the other book is called Good to Great, and both books are kind of the same thing about business and effective leadership. And so, Good to Great was a an analysis of a lot of different organizations within the 90s of how like some of those ones that really prospered, like what was the kind of the consistent approach by a lot of those CEOs or the leadership type people from a leadership perspective. The Good to Great book is pretty small. You could probably read it in a weekend, but there's a lot of great insights in
Awesome.
both
Thanks
books.
so much for sharing. And that is all we had for today's conversation. So thank you for joining us today, Nick. I think this was a great conversation with a lot of really helpful and great information in it. So thanks again.
Yeah, really, no problem.
That
Happy to
wraps
be
up our
here.
interview with Nick Cozzolino. If you found this episode insightful, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more episodes featuring our thought leaders. And if you're interested in checking out Nick's recommendations, they have been linked on our Spotify as well as the TBG Talks page of our website. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.